Welcome to yet another video from Car Plebs. We will get right into the topic of the day, but before that I would like to ask you to subscribe and like to support the growth of the channel and naturally the happiness of the YouTube algorithm itself. So let's get right into it. The Lenovo Legion 5 Pro is a gaming laptop first and a light traveler second. It represents an amazing value in the current economic climate, as I can barely, if at all, purchase a RTX 3070 at the MSRP of this laptop. It has some amazing features which we will dive into today, leading me to say that this will certainly be one of the best laptops of 2021. Again, we need to celebrate the display for being QHD, which strikes the perfect balance between image fidelity, power to run, and minor window scaling issues as opposed to a 4K panel at this size. Hopefully it won't disappoint. This video is divided into chapters if you would like to skip to thermals and performance. In terms of exterior design, the overarching theme is subdued, which I highly appreciate as it is not your typical gamery notebook, the likes of the Acer Predator and many others with even highlighted WASD keys on the keyboard. The keyboard deck is covered in a subtle gray metallic with an embossed Lenovo logo. The rear Legion logo, to quote my wife, looks like the devil's Mercedes. Rah! I also highly appreciate the minimal bezel surrounding the display. So in general, other than the logo, I really like the design. I believe it will age like a fine bottle of wine, but you need to be the judge here, as at the end of the day, your preference should decide. The laptop weighs in at 2.5 kilograms, which means it's not light, but on the other hand, it's still quite manageable. The MacBook Pro 16 that I own weighs approximately 2 kilos. Therefore, for that 0.5 kilogram, you do get a lot in return. So exactly, it's not, that heavy. The charger, on the other hand, is huge and actually quite heavy. It weighs around 750 grams, as opposed to the MacBook Pro's charger that is approximately 300 or so grams. So that you're definitely going to notice while carrying around, and it's just huge. In terms of build quality, I would honestly rate it at a 7 out of 10. First of all, the palm rest is plastic, which in my eyes does not bode well with long-term use. There is also minimal flex in the middle of the keyboard deck. Other than that, the top and the bottom are made out of aluminum, so in general the package as a whole is very sturdy and in my eyes will handle many types of rough handling. But do not expect this to rival a Razer Blade or a MacBook Pro. There is one issue that I need to mention, which is that the first Legion Pro I received and did the unboxing of, shameless plug at the top right corner, had a defective keyboard, and despite OS reinstallation, BIOS updates, driver updates, the Vantage control center did not recognize that I had in fact an RGB keyboard. And I could not turn off the glory that is a full-blown rainbow, which I do realize increases the power by 10%, but I simply wanted it off. Another thing was that I heard some noticeable bizarre mechanical ticking inside the chassis, and obviously except for the fans there isn't so much moving inside, so I thought maybe that was an electrical short. So this is why I decided as well to make these reviews going forward, because it's very important that you extensively test a laptop prior to purchase to make sure that everything is in order. Keyboard, oh the keyboard. Given that I have been using the MacBook Pro's keyboard for the past year, I have associated extensive typing sessions on laptops as an absolute pain, relishing the MX Browns on my mechanical keyboard when I could. The script for today's video was written on the Legion, and I'm happy to share that this is the best laptop keyboard I have used to date. The travel is amazing, the bounce, the feedback as well. The only thing to critique is that I would have preferred white LEDs for that ultimate stealth look. All manufacturers include 3 RGB LEDs, red, green, blue obviously on the keyboard, as opposed to having an RGBW setup where the W stands for white. But really, as I'm typing away right now, it's an absolute pleasure. On to the trackpad. Despite the surface not being glass, which is a pet peeve for me, the surface allows for smooth tracking and all types of gestures work fine without an issue. Scrolling seems to be perfect. There is some acceleration, which I do appreciate. It's very natural feeling, similarly for like minimizing, maximizing windows, etc. And of course, we are dealing here with Windows precision drivers. The trackpad overall has a nice size and therefore full marks from mine except for the material. Regarding the I/O, in my opinion, it is one of the best selections in the industry today, as you have 4 USB 3.1 Type A's, one of which you can toggle as always on for charging other devices, 2 USB 3.2 Type C's that are also DisplayPort 1.4 enabled, meaning you can connect as many displays as you like. The rear Type C also supports power delivery. While you won't be able to utilize the full performance, it's still tremendously useful to have. So for example, in my use case, I can carry just one charger if I'm not planning to do some intensive gaming sessions with the MacBook Pro 16 having the 100-watt charger. Lastly, you have an HDMI 2.1, which for example supports high refresh 4K televisions or monitors, an Ethernet jack, and still the obligatory headphone jack. What has now become a trademark of the Legion brand is having as many of the ports in the rear, which will greatly declutter your desk setup, making for a minimalist look as opposed to having a spaghetti on the left and right of your laptop, as for example with the Triton 500 that I owned in the past. In terms of connectivity, you of course get Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.1 courtesy of Intel. I will be incredibly brief with regards to battery life, as it's a desktop replacement. It will get the job done as long as you manage your task, utilize Optimus, and disable the dedicated GPU. But let me know in the comments below if you would want me to check out the battery life in detail. Now on to the speakers. The speakers are Harman branded with the Naimic. I have no idea how to pronounce that software suite, but in short, they're, in my humble opinion, just about average. I am spoiled by the speakers in the MacBook Pro 16, which sound like a Bose Mini. Take a listen. The MacBook clearly takes the win here, and the Lenovo lacks in clarity and bass. One great feature though is the audio jack fidelity. It can easily power my Beyerdynamics Studio headset, and there is zero interference nor delay. In my eyes, the audio jack fully negates the speaker quality, as I do not need to carry around a full of shit. I just had to laugh at that one, sorry. And now to the display. Hip hip hooray. The display absolutely does not disappoint. It's a 16-inch QHD panel, 2560 by 1600, IPS, 16 by 10, 500 nits, 165 Hz, 3 millisecond response time, 100% sRGB coverage, VESA display HDR, trademark 400 certified, Dolby Vision TM enabled, NVIDIA G-Sync. So normally I would detest the alternative to use a laptop display on a Windows laptop, even one from Lenovo, as I had in the past many issues with light bleed on, I believe, the Y720 or 540, I don't remember, but I had to return like 7 or 6 laptops because of light bleed. But this QHD panel is simply glorious. Color reproduction is excellent. I can reference to a color calibrated external panel. There's also no apparent ghosting, no apparent light bleed. I played some sessions of CSGO and Cyberpunk, and it was an absolute pleasure. Also working on this review, reading the reference text from the Lenovo's website, the clarity and sharpness of the text is simply put excellent. Similarly, black levels are good, and same goes for the contrast. The Lenovo Vantage software is surprisingly useful. It quickly found all of my necessary updates, including performing a BIOS update, which is not always granted. You can control, for example, hybrid settings, which is the dedicated switching between the GPU as well as Optimus. You can limit the charge level of the battery. You can register for warranty, control the RGB love and hate of the keyboard, etc. So from my perspective, fully recommend getting the Lenovo Vantage software from the Microsoft Marketplace, whatever it's called. So now on to my favorite section, at least for me personally, which is the performance and thermals and anything else. First thing to mention is the BIOS. It's very flexible, allowing for many features and settings, etc., for security, etc. But this is again a gaming laptop, at least for me personally, in our editing rig. It allows you to switch between GPUs, and definitely a cool standout feature is that within the BIOS you can overclock the GPU, and I have nothing against Afterburner, but not needing another piece of software running in the background, in my eyes, is just far better and a more elegant solution. Next up is the MUX switch, which is still sadly quite rare. It allows you basically to switch from the dedicated GPU, allowing for a direct connection and removing any parasitic losses. And on the other hand, if you're looking for more battery life, it does have the hybrid mode by Optimus, which means you can switch between the integrated graphics processor unit as well as, of course, dedicated. The laptop features cold front cooling. Disregarding marketing lingo by Lenovo, it is a beefy and effective cooling system that has no issue with the components in this laptop. The keyboard deck never gets overly warm. Even after playing many hour sessions over the past few days, it was always comfortable. I never felt anything on the fingertips, so from my side, full marks here. On to the fan noise, and I will play a brief clip now. So as you could hear, it's nothing terrible. I mean, it's nothing great, but on the other hand, it's not a high pitch sound, so to speak. It's a low humming whoosh. So like, as opposed to, sorry, I'm cracking up at it myself again. But really, seriously, I mean, it's nothing super intrusive. Of course, with the quality of the speakers, but anyways, I'm going to be using a headset as opposed to the built-in speakers, but in general, full marks as well from my end. So now on to the performance metrics. What I'm showing here is the average temperature, wattage, and clock speed of the CPU and GPU playing Witcher 3 on ultra settings on QHD for a duration of 15 minutes, all recorded via hardware info. The average temperature of the CPU was 82, which is absolutely fine. The GPU was a cool 76. The CPU power draw was 22 watts, the GPU is 139, and I'll get back to that in a moment. The average frequency of the processor was 3700. With regards to the GPU, it was 1736. Now, why is 139 great? It means that this laptop can optimally even outperform certain 3080s. Why? Because it can consistently take a lot of power. And this test also shows us something very important. Because after 15 minutes, you're fully thermally saturating both the CPU, the GPU, and of course, the cooling system. And if it can on average take 139 watts, it means it can consistently perform extremely well. The other standout feature was the average clock speed. Now, again, this is a moment of celebration that a laptop with 8 physical cores can have an average clock frequency of 3700 megahertz. I mean, those were figures that were not obtainable on a desktop like 4 or 5 years ago on 8-core processors. I've also attached some screenshots both from hardware info while I was running The Witcher 3, which I use for reference, and a second screenshot, which is Firestrike stress test, just to show you how the system behaved after a 97.5 pass, just so you can see the maximums. Here again, nothing super surprising. Again, great performance overall. The main contender for today's performance comparisons will be my desktop 9900K with an RTX 2080 for comparison, because I think it's a nice way to demonstrate the differences between a laptop that is a few generations newer and a desktop that was pretty much top of the line except for of course the Ti. So let's move on to Cinebench 15. As we can see, the desktop 9900K performed at 202 in terms of single core. My friend's Legion 5 Pro performed 218 with the 5600H, which is a 6-core, and my 5800H performed at 229, again, respectable results. And this is, again, amazing to see a single-core result higher than a desktop that was flagship and still remains, of course, quite good compared to even the current offering from Intel. When we move on to the multi-core, I also have some benchmarks from the past from my other laptops, so don't mind them. We have here as an example the Razer Blade with the i7 9750H, which performed 1000 points approximately. Then the desktop performed 1800 points. My friend's Legion Pro 5 performed 1600 points, and the 5800H in my Legion 5 performed with 2100 points. Again, excellent result for the Legion 5 Pro, an admirable result for the Legion 5 Pro with the 5600H. Now if we move on to Cinebench 20, again for single core, funnily enough, the Legion 5 with the 5600H is exactly on par with the desktop 9900K. In the case of the 5800H, it's 552. On the multi-core side, we have the desktop running at 4700, the Legion 5 Pro at 3500 with the 5600H, and my Legion 5 Pro with the 5800H running at 5022. Now we move on to Geekbench 5, single core and multi-core. For the desktop, it performed 1300. For my Legion 5 with the 5800H, it performed at 1443, and the 5600H variant of the Legion 5 performed a respectable 1391. In terms of the multi-core, again, the desktop here outperformed both laptops, which again was a nice result just to see Intel sort of fight back at this stage, but again, overall great results on all ends. Now we move on to gaming. So why I included an old title like Shadow of the Tomb Raider? For one, it has DX11, and the second part, of course, is that I had some other laptops that I tested in the past. So don't mind them, that they're here really just for a reference point, just to show how laptop GPUs have evolved over the past years. So we have the blades running at around 82 and 101 with the 2070 Max-Q. Then we have the Triton 500 with the 2080 Max-Q running at 106 frames per second. And then we have the desktop 2080 at 150 and the Legion 5 Pro with the RTX 3070 at 122. By the way, let me know in the comments below if you would like to see a battle down or a showdown between the Legion 5 Pro with the RTX 3070 5800H and the Legion 5 Pro RTX 3060 with the 5600H. Now we move on to Assassin's Creed Origins. Again, 1920 by 1080, preset was ultra high, and here we see basically the Triton 500 and the blade being pretty much on par, as well as the desktop RTX 2080 in my build with the Legion 5 Pro with the RTX 3070 pulling here nicely ahead. Now let's move on to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which honestly speaking is quite still a difficult game to run. We ran it at 1920 by 1080 with the preset ultra high. And so here the 2060 is, funnily enough, still performing excellent. And then we have the 2070 and 2080, which, have some bumps, but I wouldn't say it justifies the cost. Absolutely not in this case. And then we have the desktop RTX 2080 at 76 frames per second and the Legion 5 with 73 frames. Now it gets more interesting because we start showing some results where we're comparing HD and QHD on the one hand side, and we have here with the Shadow of the Tomb Raider DLSS and RTX enabled with 2 resolutions, and what we can see is quite interesting. On the HD side, the desktop outperforms strongly the Legion. However, once we switch it to QHD, something interesting happens, that we have 100 frames for the Legion, whereas 94 frames on the desktop. And sort of this is the emerging theme, that I see that this GPU is optimized for higher resolutions because the gap nearly always tightens when we increase the resolution. Now on to RDR2, notoriously a difficult game to run with the 2 resolutions. Preset was the highest quality. I have to say on a side note that their sort of settings manager for graphics is just absolutely terrible, but let's move on. The Legion 5 again 79 and 83, and here we can really see the gap close between the 2080 and the 3070. Where, we're talking about margin of error almost levels of difference in terms of the QHD resolution, which again, considering the fact that this is a smallish laptop, not a, Area 51 or whatever the biggest Alienware laptop is called. Next game is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which I haven't yet played other than downloaded to do the benchmarks. And again, here we can see some great results. Here, of course, we can see that the 2080 is outperforming the Legion 5. I don't know why. I reran the benchmark a few times and the results were consistent. And now into the last game, which is Witcher 3, set to QHD with the preset ultra high. We can see 114 frames for the desktop RTX and 108 frames for the Legion 5. Again, a great result for the Legion 5, comparing that this is a small chassis, etc. And lastly, we have the synthetic benchmarks. So first, let's start off with 3D Mark Firestrike, and here we can see the 2060, 2070, and 2080 sort of performing in the same realm. What is interesting to see here that the 3060 is really on par with the 2080. So that's something that you can take into account, that if you want to purchase a 3060 laptop, given that it will have the correct wattage, it may perform just the same or even slightly higher than a 2080, depending of course on game and architecture, etc. Now what I really like to see here is the fact that the 3070 nearly beats the 2080. Of course the 2080 here takes the clear win, but still it's just amazing to see something like this on benchmarks. I mean, personally, I'm super enthusiastic when I see results like these. And the last on the list is the 3D Mark Port Royale, flexing its RTX muscle, so to speak. And here we can see that the 2060 and 2070 are relatively similar, the 2080 clearly taking the lead. Now, here is where the newer architecture of the 3060 beats the 2080. So here you might see better results with RTX enabled titles. And funnily enough, the Legion 5 here takes the full win with the RTX 3070 beating out the RTX 2080 and the desktop. And again, that's a crazy result In conclusion, the Lenovo Legion 5 Pro with the RTX 3070 and Ryzen 5800H represents one of the best deals on the market, if not the best deal. I highly recommend this laptop for its build quality, its screen, its performance, and overall package and design. I think it strikes the perfect balance, price to performance, to design, to portability. One of the best laptops on the market, and I think the best laptop of 2021. This was the first video of its kind. I normally focus on car reviews, so if you like this type of content, please hit like and let me know in the comments. And wishing everybody a nice day. Take care. Bye-bye.